one of the most ever-present themes in dystopian literature that is both chilling and critical is this creeping tendrils of totalitarianism in our world. George Orwell once penned a really haunting prophecy. He said, if you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. This captures the brutal essence of totalitarian regimes, and especially we see this, and we're going to study it all day today in our talk here. And it's a vision that's no longer confined to the pages of the novel 1984 by George Orwell, but it's increasingly mirrored in our reality. Yet as a world of physical oppression is only just one side of this coin, the other form of oppression we're going to talk about today, it's less overt, but it's just as sinister and evil, and that's the psychological manipulation and propaganda that can enslave as quickly and maybe even more completely than just physical violence. Today, we're confronting a disturbing reality. This spread of totalitarianism in our world, it's ugly, it's maddening, it invokes anger and anxiety about our future, and it's happening right under our noses. So we have to confront this reality, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, from the mass surveillance systems in China to the erosion of democratic norms worldwide. Totalitarianism it's not just some relic anymore of the 20th century. It's a present-day menace, and governments increasingly are using technology to monitor and control citizens. They are suppressing dissent. They're manipulating information. This is not some far-off threat. It's a global trend with implications for you and for me. So glad you're back as we move on to the second in our lecture series, Echoes of Tyranny. And today is going to be fun. We're going to connect our novel 1984 by George Orwell and explore deeper than I bet you would ever get in a college classroom, just because I'm not confined by time nor space. And this theme in any other comparative literature course would probably have to be boiled down to maybe a 20, 30-minute lecture, maybe an hour max. But we're gonna go really deep into this. And as I mentioned, please, if you want to max out your learning on this topic, I'm so pleased you're listening in here. But have a look at the show notes quick, and you're inside of those show notes. I'm putting a reading list out there as I'm working through these topics in Echoes of Tyranny. And if you do this, you can just read along with me. Besides just having fun, hearing the words, you can treat this series almost like a mini college course as you read along and you understand these two amazing novels that we're working through. But enough with that. Let's just go ahead, jump into it. I'm ready to go, and I hope you are too. So let's just start right at the very basics. What in the world am I talking about when I say totalitarianism? It's a huge mouthful of a word. Hopefully I can keep saying it all the way through this long podcast. But at its core, totalitarianism, it's a political system. And it's a system where the state or the government holds total authority over society and controls basically every aspect of public and private life. Think about it. What you wear, what you buy, where you go on vacation, what you say online or offline, what you drive, how you drive, all your health data, all your financial history, all your academic history, everything you do, buy, places you go, is completely under the thumb of the state at all times. And quite frankly, you and me and all of us far too often just naively and unthinkingly go through our day without even considering the long-term implications of what happens as we're being surveilled. The days of saying silly statements like, well, I don't care if the government watches me. They'd be really bored following me around. Now, these statements, they just need to end, and it's time to stop saying them. Because the long game isn't about you and where you walk your fluffy little pet after each Monday through Friday, or what brand of t-shirt you buy on Amazon, or even what websites you check on the surface. These seem like nothing burgers, as really who would care, who could care. However, just slow down one moment to think, what if someone did want to control you? What would they need to have at their disposal to control you? If I myself wanted to control your life, it would be extremely helpful for me to know what you do, where you go, what websites you visit, what your financial situation is, what you like, what you dislike, who you prefer politically, what are your stances on A, B, or C. Surveillance like that, at the end of the day, is a mechanism for control, pure and simple. Because if it didn't matter, the government wouldn't care about it either. Yet they are constantly infringing on those rights. But the fact is, already today, the government does know everything about you, or just about everything about you. And well, if you are not actively monitored with nothing more than a simple court order, your entire world and what you do and have done could be exposed. This is a reality in the world right now today, not some futuristic dystopian world that both Orwell and Huxley were talking about. We have it right now. And if you don't think so, you may want to reconsider that view, because Big Brother's all-seeing eye is everywhere. Totalitarianism in literature, it's been a recurring theme for centuries. I mean, really, highlighting absolute power's extreme consequences. Outside of Orwell and Huxley, you could have a look at like Margaret Atwood's A Handmaid's Tale, that talks about this theocratic regime that controls every aspect of women's lives, or even Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, where the government is in control of everything and bans books and manipulates knowledge simply to hold control over everything. These stories are potent commentaries on the loss of freedom and the perils of oppressive regimes. But an example I find relevant in modern movies is The Eye of Sauron in The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I particularly enjoyed how the Sauron's eye was portrayed in the movie. This potent symbol of a far-reaching power's ability to see and influence events all across Middle-earth, representing, a form of oppressive surveillance. But the two common characteristics of totalitarianism in The Lord of the Rings that we also see in our studies of 1984 and The Brave New World are this: omniscience and control. So that eye of Sauron symbolizing, all-seeing, all-knowing, control over everything, and the ability to exert influence over its inhabitants. And this same form of surveillance creates an atmosphere of oppression and of fear, which is ever present as you read through the novel 1984 by George Orwell, because of, the Big Brother is always there, always everywhere. And, going back to the movie, the fear and intimidation is the other thing. And that eye of Sauron in the movie from Lord of the Rings, its unblinking gaze, it represents a constant threat of being watched and the danger of being discovered. And that pervasive fear stifles any thought, even a thought of resistance, and promotes this sense of helplessness among Sauron's enemies, that they're just stuck in it. Studying dystopian literature works. It's more than just an academic exercise. Otherwise, in all honesty, why are we even bothering with this? except maybe for a fun Netflix binge night as you're watching Lord of the Rings. But through our studies and books and philosophies and real lives and stories, we can start to see how these mechanisms of control in a fictional work are actually eroding our freedoms in our world today, and how it's really important that we don't back down in fear. Because one thing is sure, when a government takes something from you, it's safe to bet they will never give it back. I just challenge you to even look through the history of our government here in the United States of America. When have they ever taken away a right or a freedom and then given it back to us after they took it? I would love you to put in the comments of this podcast an example, because I can't even think of a single one myself. So as we turn our attention to 1984, we'll see how this depiction of totalitarianism is a very hardcore reminder of what can happen when power goes unchecked. Okay, before we get going too deep, let's take just a moment to bring our protagonist from the novel 1984, Winston Smith, to life. This will be fun because it kind of adds a little depth to everything we're talking about. So I want you to do this for me. Just picture a man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. He's pretty frail. He's got this really ugly varicose ulcer above his right ankle. And, Winston, let's face it, he's not the image of a robust Superman or Spider-Man-like hero that we're dealing with in this novel here. He's thin, bony frame, prematurely aged features. Imagine that he looks more like 55 instead of mid-30s or early 40s. And all this gives him an air of, how would you call it? Maybe weariness, almost like the weight of the world, or actually the weight of Big Brother surveillance. It's resting heavily on his shoulders. Winston's face, it's pale. I envision almost ghostly. His eyes, kind of this perpetual look of unease, probably darting around with a mix of paranoia, not unlike how I can imagine most citizens in Oceania feel, but has this distinct look of someone constantly fighting an internal battle. I think we've all seen people like that, right? Where you just see they're going through stuff internally, and they don't look healthy. They don't look happy. They don't look at peace. They look anxiety and frustration and riddled with probably all kinds of inflammation all over the place. He tries on the external to look like he's sane and he's going through his world. Even his hair, probably, they describe it. It was probably at one point in his life dark and full, but now his hair's thinning and graying, and it's got a pretty, yes, you'd say, haggard, worn down appearance. And when I read this novel mentally, Winston really is kind of this cocktail of contradictions. And when you read it, you might get a little taste of this. Because on the one hand, he appears to be this devoted party member, and he's working for the Ministry of Truth, and his job's to alter historical records as needed by the government. But on the other hand, his mind is incredibly rebellious. It's filled with dangerous thoughts and memories that defy the party's doctrines. He does one thing the average robot-trained citizen would never dare to do. And here's your hint that Winston might just be a little bit different than the average sheep in the flock. He scribbles these notes on a secret diary that he bought in secret. And that act of defiance by itself could lead to his death, his vaporization. And his mental state is one of perpetual anxiety. He oscillates between this idea, this hope, and this the hope that maybe somehow, some way, this regime could just be overthrown and freedom could be restored. So it's oscillating between that and just despair. Just thinking there's no way out of this. And it oscillates between defiance, like even just scribbling in a little notepad is an act that you could be executed for. But then at the same time, if you'd see him on the street, if you'd see him in the office, you'd think it's just a pure act of submission. And this alone makes him enough of a hero to drive this storyline in the novel 1984. You know, it's not uncommon to hear stories and parables about greatness not always being defined by some extraordinary physical or mental power, but rather just the average citizen, you and I, with just enough character and enough will to show up and dream for something. And Winston is this type of a person. His characteristics are this bizarre blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary. He's not a hero in our traditional sense. And there are no bulging biceps, chiseled jawlines. Instead, he's just every man, every person. He's a reluctant rebel. Prefer probably not to have to do any of this. And he's going up against this all-powerful, omnipotent regime. So his bravery is incredibly subtle, but as you read the novel and he sounds maybe a little pathetic to you, don't buy it. Don't buy it. Because, you know, that bravery requires an overcoming of fear. And yes, true, often his fear overcomes him. Yet this very human fear makes his courage even more profound as we work our way through this novel. And in Winston, Orwell's crafted just a painfully honest character and this very stark reminder of the fragility but still the resilience of the human spirit when they're faced with overwhelming oppression. Still, despite his many weaknesses, he's enough of a hero to appreciate him and to empathize with him and even marvel at his character. So Winston is the character that's going to take us through a world of totalitarianism. You know, totalitarianism, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, is one of the most important themes in Orwell's work. That's why I wanted to take it on so early. And in Oceania, the world where the novel takes place, everything happens for and through the party. The party controls every single aspect of life. So who is this the party? The party. The party is led by this mysterious figure known only as Big Brother. And he exercises total control. This control is not just physical, but extends deeply into the psychological realm. As it is known, thought crime, one of their primary tactics for control, is just a mere act of thinking something contrary to the party's ideology. This gives you a hint at the level of control of the government over the entire population. Not only can't you say the wrong thing, let alone do the wrong thing, but you're not even allowed to think the wrong thing. Now that level of control cuts to the very essence of who you are and who I am as human beings. Thought crime is the most egregious offense that one can commit. And you might be thinking, well, how in the world are they getting into minds? They have something implanted. Well, they deploy various methods to deter and to punish thought crime, from telescreens that are in the house that are watching everybody, to the thought police who monitor facial expressions. I think they're not doing that already now with facial recognition software here all across the globe. Body language for signs of dissent. Just one wrong look or giving one bad vibe could land a person in jail for quote-unquote re-education, or even worse, they might find themselves executed. So Winston Smith, this protagonist, he works at a place. And the place he works, ironically, known as the Ministry of Truth, his job is an interesting one. His job is to alter historical records to match the party's current narrative, whatever that narrative might be. Ever heard of a politician or a government having one opinion and then totally flip-flopping on that opinion? Oh, I think even right now in our world today, we can come up with many, many examples of that. But this manipulation of historical records ensures that the party is always seen as infallible and they're omnipotent. Winston, over time, gains more and more awareness of the truth, and his subsequent rebellion against the party's control, working at the Ministry of Truth. This is going to form the core of the novel's plot. So even early in the novel, Winston understands that his life is in a very, very precarious state. And he ruminates about his predicament here. And here's a quote directly from the novel. Thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death. Now that he had recognized himself as a dead man, it became important to stay alive as long as possible. The thought police would get him just the same. He had committed, would have committed, even if he had never set pen to paper, the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later, they were bound to get you. End quote. So the thought police, they're everywhere. It's an inescapable force, and this amplifies his despair because he knows that he's committing this all the time. He's even committed pen to paper on this. And the notion that thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever, it sort of injects a sense of relentless pursuit and this unavoidable capture. This constant surveillance and certainty of eventual punishment create an environment where fear is an ever-present companion, and it stifles any flicker of hope, really. And so the broad implications of this passage extend beyond the individual into the societal level. The party's ability to instill such deep-seated fear and control over thoughts that no one can trust their own mind even, let alone those of others. In this world of suspicion and fear, there is no community. It isn't even uncommon for neighbors, friends, or even family members to rat out one of their own for fear of being complicit in any action. Thought crime is brilliant at eroding the bonds of trust and solidarity that human beings have that might otherwise lead to a collective resistance. The pervasive dread that sooner or later they were bound to get you makes people isolated, paranoid, and with a sense of helplessness. So understanding the depth of despair that in this passage highlights how totalitarian regimes today not only suppress dissent, but almost more importantly, extinguish the human spirit. Also understanding the party's methods of thought control is crucial because they reflect the real-world dangers of unchecked governmental power and the manipulation of truth. By exploring these concepts, we can recognize the ways in which freedom of thought and expression are being eroded today in our own society. So in the novel, the party's method of thought control, they're absolutely crucial because they reflect real-world dangers when unchecked government power has the capacity and the ability to manipulate the truth, and nobody says anything. The media doesn't say anything. The general population doesn't say anything. Those in power in the schools, in all across corporate positions, when they just fall silent. And by exploring the concepts, we can recognize the subtle ways in which freedom of thought and expression are being eroded in our society. So let's stop here and discuss just the idea of thought crime and the thought police in our world today. So what do you think? Is a version of thought crime alive and well in America today? I mean, just sitting here, I can think of multiple signs pointing to the fact that, yes, America and much of the West has already moved down the path of thought crime as an aspect of society and culture, and politicians are pushing them. To say we live in a polarized political environment is an understatement. It's highly charged political climate. Even private conversations or support for certain political views, it can result in social ostracism or worse, aligning with the idea of thought crime, where societal standards consider certain beliefs unacceptable. You'd lose your job. Recent survey from the Cato Institute found that nearly 65% of Americans feel the current political climate prevents them from expressing certain beliefs because they might, quote unquote, offend others. Don't you think that's a form of thought crime? The sentiment spans across political affiliations. It affects Democrats, it affects Republicans and independents. This fear of expressing views is also evident in concerns about potential impacts on employment, with a sizable portion of the population worried that their political opinions may jeopardize their job or future job opportunities or career progression. Maybe you, on many occasions, have felt the need to keep your mouth shut on a topic you feel strongly about due to these societal suppressions. That's thought crime right there in action in our world today. Cultural and corporate cancel culture, it's real. We all know this. And our landscape is littered with examples of individuals and companies canceled based on a belief. Censorship on social media platforms and algorithmic manipulations control thought. We have literally even had the CEO of Meta come out and say that the Biden administration, in fact, did tell them to suppress certain ideas on the COVID scare and to amplify other ones. So this banning or suspending of accounts for expressing opinions, I mean, that's a form of thought crime where only certain viewpoints can even be heard. But now, I mean, even the big social platforms they're so sophisticated, and we hear this idea of shadow banning, whereby they can exponentially diminish the reach of one certain opinion and in turn amplify the other one. Because a company will deem something bad or not valid just based on their own position. And that's just what Meta did. And that's not an opinion. You can find that letter written to Congress by Mark Zuckerberg from Meta that they did in fact shadow ban, that they did in fact amplify government messages. But in general, to take the other side, shadow banning, it's very tricky. And I'm sure it's tricky to pull off and to catch. But it is insidious. It's actually worse than an outright ban. Because if you're outright banned, they just came out of the darkness into the light of day and told you, we are biased. We are not going to allow free speech. We are not going to allow you to say anything. But in a shadow ban, the organization that is doing the banning can say to the public, oh, no, we didn't ban anyone. They're still on the platform. You can search them. You can find them. So they can literally ban someone now without actually banning anyone. And it's a beautiful thing for the ideologically captured media company or the corrupt politicians or a corrupt political party. I mean, it's really nice. It's sort of like, imagine you're playing hide and seek and you're a kid and your friend tells you to go hide. But then he neglects to tell you that no one is actually going to be looking for you. In essence, you're playing the game by yourself. And you'll never be found because nobody else knows to be looking for you. Not a very fun game, is it? Not at least for very long, that's for sure. Well, shadow banning is a bit like that. It's when a social media platform quietly makes a person's post hard to find or invisible to other users without telling the person who created the content or that the creator's followers that it's happening. So they keep posting pictures, comments, videos, thinking all their friends and followers, they can see them and they can be found in internet searches. But in reality, their posts are hidden. Nobody knows they're there. They haven't been officially told they're banned. They're just quietly pushed out of sight. An interesting phenomenon happened after the Trump assassination attempt, and Google had to admit to this as well, and you can search that out yourself, that if you typed assassination, when that was probably the most significant event going on at that particular moment in time, if you put that in the Google search bar, it'd put assassination attempt of John Kennedy. It would put in, I think, a Truman. It was putting in all kinds of people, but it wouldn't autofill assassination attempt of Donald Trump. You had to type the whole thing out, hit enter, and then it would show up. That's a form of shadow banning. And it's suppression of thought. Sure, the content creator, are you trying to learn something? You had the thoughts and you were looking for insights and analysis and opinions. It's just that not everybody else was able to find the same thing. And if nobody knows the content is out there, did they even really happen? First of all, it's dangerous when citizens from a democracy can express their opinions, when a big tech company, a government agency, or political party deem them bad. That's not democracy. That's totalitarianism. That's the kind of thing that happens in China. It's the kind of thing that happens in Venezuela or Cuba. And when I think about it, when a self-proclaimed platform that they are open and free shadow ban because they don't agree with someone, this is one of the worst forms of suppression possible. And every time we hear of these stories, we should, in the future, look a more skeptical eye towards these particular companies that do that. If and when a company can flex its powerful muscles and decide what gets to be heard and not be heard, we have a real problem. It even gets more and more scary when, as has been revealed, that political parties, the FBI and other agencies, have very directly told big social media companies to suppress or remove content for and wait for it, these are the worst words out of the government's mouths, quote unquote, for the public good. And in the vein of good old boy crony capitalism, they comply almost without fail. That, my friends, is what happens in a totalitarian regime that we in America allege as horrific examples of brutality and lack of freedom of speech. Yet right here, right now in America, this has happened and is happening right now. This whole travesty of media manipulation, banning or shadow banning, it's going to go down in history as a colossal embarrassment that we may never recover from, because the trust that we had in our institutions, it just keeps getting eroded worse and worse. And if the U.S. does fall into a totalitarian state, this idea, this complicence of the media and big tech will be one of the leading causes. Okay, here we go. Back to the novel. And for a minute now, I want to shift gears towards this esteemed institution known as the Ministry of Truth. I don't think in the novel it can't be talked about enough, because this was the world that Winston worked in, and we know work makes up a huge chunk of our lives, but this employer, this oh so wonderful employer, and oh so respected government agency known as the Ministry of Truth. Most of us in our lives at some point have had the unfortunate situation at some time of working for a dishonest, unethical employer or a boss. I mean, if you work long enough, everyone gets that lovely life experience. But poor Winston in 1984, his employer is the Ministry of Truth, which is, well, the exact opposite of promoting truth. Winston's job, as I had mentioned previously in this government monstrosity, is to alter historical records to fit the party's ever-changing narrative. And this manipulation ensures that the party is always perceived as infallible and always right. The ministry's activities are crucial to how the party maintains control, rewriting history to ensure it aligns with its present needs and its present narratives. And Winston's job involves basically erasing all traces of people who have been vaporized. Another, maybe a nicer way or a cleaner way of saying they've been executed and they have been erased from existence. So he changes records to show the party was always right, and destroying evidence of any contradictory facts, and of course, dragging through the mud the reputation of any person who was vaporized and who has gotten in the way of the party narrative. And Winston, while at his job and working through one of those days, he ponders his position and his existence in the Ministry of Truth. And he says this, quote, "The past," he reflected, "had not merely been altered, it had been actually destroyed. For how could you establish even the most obvious fact when there existed no record outside your own memory?" He tried to remember in what year he had first heard mention of Big Brother. He thought it must have been at some time in the 1960s, but it was impossible to be certain. In the party histories, of course, Big Brother figured as the leader and the guardian of the revolution since its very earliest days. His exploits had been gradually pushed backwards in time until already they extended into the fabulous world of the 40s and the 30s. There was not knowing how much of this legend was true, how much of it was invented. Winston could not even remember at what date the party itself had come into existence. Everything melted into mist. Sometimes, indeed, you could put your finger on a definite lie. It was not true, for example, as was claimed in the party history books, that the party had invented airplanes. He remembered airplanes since his earliest childhood, but he could not prove anything. There was never any evidence, just once in his life he had possessed after the event. That was what counted. Concrete, unmistakable evidence of an act of falsification. He had held it between his fingers for as long as 30 seconds. In 1973, it must have been. At any rate, it was about the time when he and Catherine had parted. But the really relevant date was 7 or 8 years earlier. So I love that passage there, because it illustrates the extent to which the party manipulates truth in history, effectively controlling reality. See, there were moments in time like the airplane. He remembers one in childhood, the party claimed to have created airplanes. He knows that's not true. And then there was this one guy in 1973 that had been vaporized, but it wasn't actually that year. It was 8 years earlier. And the only reason he can remember it because it was about the time that him and his first wife had left. And so, grasping at the truth for Winston was like grabbing a hold of the wind or a single raindrop in a storm. Nothing could stick. He had ideas of it, but he couldn't grasp it. And he was even one of the minions charged with altering history. But even in his job, it was hard to grasp the constant flows of truths, half-truths, lies. As like a shapeshifter, these things were constantly in motion. And it reminds me of a famous quote by this German philosopher. Not one of the most well-known philosophers. Her name was Hannah Arendt. And she lived, between the 1900s. I think she died around 1975-ish. And she saw and she read some things from World War I, World War II, and then of course she lived all the way through the Cold War, into the Cold War. But she once said this, quote, "This constant lying is not aimed at making the people believe a lie, but at ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong." I want to say that one more time because I really want you to get this. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. And such a people, deprived of the power to think and judge without knowing and willing it, completely subjected to the rules of the lies. With such a people, you can do whatever you want. End quote. Constantly lying is not about making people believe a lie, but making them think they can't believe anything anymore. Have you ever had that feeling like you just can't believe anything that comes out the mouth of a politician or our government anymore? Well, that's the aim. That's the goal of something like the ministry of truth. Because once truth is gone from the equation, what in the world can we replace truth with? What is it? If we don't have the truth, what do we have? Well, the answer is right in front of us today because we live it. And we don't like to hear it. What we've done in our postmodern world that we're in right now, we replace truth with a narrative. And narratives or stories are much more permeable, and they're much more compelling in convincing people to believe one way or another. And you see, the ministry of truth's actions highlight the power of information and its role in maintaining authoritarian regimes. Understanding this concept helps us see the importance that we have to preserve objective historical records, and we must resist the manipulation of information by those that are in power. But let's talk just 1 minute here about the ministry of truth and in comparison to our political parties and the media, because they're also involved in this. In fact, it's sort of hard to find a distinction between Orwell's dystopian vision and our modern reality right now. And I'm going to talk about gaslighting, which is our sort of modern equivalent to just flat out lying, as so much of the propaganda was spewed from the Ministry of Truth in the novel 1984. My goodness, gaslighting is off the chart. It is one of the most infuriating and frustrating things I think that I personally struggle with when I hear any politician talk. So let's take a hypothetical politician from Party X. Let's call this person, just for the sake of making something up, candidate Trump Harris. Running for, let's just pretend, President of the United States of America. Our ambitious, youngish, or elderly-ish person, whichever you prefer. Who knows, candidate Trump Harris is known for their very charismatic speeches and extremely bold claims. And during a televised debate, Trump-Harris adamantly declares that they have never supported a controversial bill, despite multiple recordings of this person on videotape and in interviews on national TV, and their colleagues endorsing it just last year. Well, in interviews following the debate, when confronted with this apparent flip-flop of evidence, our dear Trump-Harris doubles down, insisting that the media has taken things out of context or even doctored up the footage, a deep fake, probably from Russia or China, somewhere like that. Trump-Harris goes on the attack and says, oh, this is nothing but a witch hunt. Extremist attack obviously orchestrated by the fake news media. Trump-Harris has the ability to spin the narrative better than a world-class DJ spins tunes, saying his opponents are using smear tactics to distract from their own deeply flawed and problematic policies. And like clockwork, the media, all cuddly warm and in bed with Trump-Harris, align their message to the audience they serve versus doing their job as arbiters of truth. Then, just like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, the media begins to echo the new claims of Trump-Harris, just muddying the waters even further. Mountains and mountains of brand new, freshly minted news articles, cable TV clips, tweets across X, all the shadowing of the old truth, and then all of a sudden, voila, it's buried under a heap of news from the new reality, and voila, the gaslighting ploy works. Those actually trying to figure out the truth are confused, as they could almost certain that the old view was this and the new view is that. But this brand new Himalaya mountain of data, that the other one was false and this one's new, has replaced it. And this scenario is an example of political gaslighting, where a politician or a party just manipulates information to make people doubt their understanding of events. And it's particularly effective in today's fast-paced media environment because it exploits just a constant flood of information. And quite frankly, you and I and our public challenge just to keep on track with all the details. But, Trump-Harris loudly and repeatedly insisting on false narratives, it reshapes public perception, making it align more with their current political goals and their current stances, even in the face of obvious contradictory evidence. And this tactic confuses the public, shifts the debate, and steers them in the direction that they want. See, you and I have a problem even more vast and deep than Winston and this dystopian world and the ministry of truth. Because the paradox of our digital age, where almost incomprehensibly vast streams of data are created every second of every day, it is now so easy to develop lies. It's actually easier to develop lies than it is to spread the truth. Our politicians know it. The media knows it. And they are unabashedly and unashamedly liars. And they change their story without even blinking an eye. Because they know something that we just have not fully grasped yet, you and I, and the general public. That there is no way the average person living their average life has the time, energy, or interest to go blow for blow with the Trump-Harrises of the world, their armies of media, and hold them accountable. So they are gaslighting us at extreme levels, at a level I know I've never seen in my entire life. I think another quote that fits in perfectly with this topic is Winston when he says, Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past, which is a sad, sad statement, but it seems to be so true. We can all understand what he's telling us. Whoever is in charge of what we remember about the past, like a history book, cable TV network, media outlet, also gets to shape what's going to happen in the future. And if you can decide what the history books or recent past says, you can influence people's thoughts and actions in the present. Now, the twist is that the person who controls the present, like being the referee in a political game today, gets to decide what goes on in the sources of history. So if you're a referee today, you can change the rules about what happened yesterday, which can change what everyone thinks will happen today. It's all a power play. Control the story, control the game. This is gaslighting. And for me, maybe this is just me. It's just the most infuriating thing about our modern political world. The Trump Harrises of the world and the duopoly we are stuck with right now in America have made gaslighting. It's just standard operating procedure. They no longer have any fear of getting caught lying, and without any repercussions, when they do lie, well, they become emboldened to say and do what they want to advance their own agendas, no matter what, because there's no longer any consequences to their actions. If a 2-year-old never has any consequences for the things they do, well, those of you who have had kids know what will happen. You will be steamrolled by a 27-pound little human. The same at 100x happens with politicians. So that ministry of truth idea, wow. That is our world today to a T. All right, let's move on and take on another topic. And this time I want to talk about words. Words matter. They always have mattered. Probably even your grandpa told you what you say matters. And they do. But when we're looking at 1984 and George Orwell, words take on a different type of meaning. And, the slogan even of the Ministry of Peace, one of the other key organization, just like the Ministry of Truth, we have the Ministry of Peace. And here's their slogan: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So this satirical jab at governments and their wordplay is funny, but not funny, because underneath it, there's a layer deeper, and it's a very powerful statement, and it's one that is marbled into this entire novel, this idea that war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. We all get it on the surface that it doesn't make any sense what's going on. But words, they have superpowers. Sure, words help us explain and describe our world, and without them, we'd be pretty much lost, but they also have the capacity to control and to shape our future. There's a critical race theorist. Now, critical race theory, that's something I disagree with most of the time, but one of the main figures in this field, he made a very powerful statement in regards to words, which I agree with 100%. So Michael Foucault once said, quote, "Discourses are not merely linguistic feats. They are power claims. They have the ability to construct reality, to impose order, and to define the bounds of what is normal and acceptable. Thus, those who control the dominant discourses wield power, not only over the distribution of knowledge, but also over the very identity and self-understanding of individuals." End quote. So words are profoundly powerful because they are the primary tools that you and I have to communicate our thoughts and our emotions and our concepts. They shape our understanding of the world in so many profound ways. They help us construct reality. The language we use to describe our experiences, they don't just give us the facts, but they convey our feelings and our attitude about those facts. They help us frame our perspective. Language takes our perspective and it focuses our attention on certain aspects of our experience while we kind of minimize other ones. And The terminology used in media, for example, can significantly affect public opinion. Calling someone a group of freedom fighters, the Palestinian freedom fighters invade Israel on October 7th, or the Palestinian terrorists invade and cross the border into Israel. See the huge difference there? Because we have these connotations and emotional responses to different words. Identity and group formation. Words are pivotal in forming and expressing our identity. The language we use about ourselves and others creates distinctions. And these distinctions can be used to unite us or divide us. This is especially evident in our political conversations today, how our national, our ethnic, our cultural identities are built around languages and dialect and reinforced or cause to repulse a certain community or alienation in other groups. When we say we're divided in this country today, it's through the language and the words that we are using that is mainly driving the wedge into our group. So words are important that way. They also propagate our culture, carries the beliefs, the values and norms, social mores of our society. And it's through stories and conversations and that language transmits this wisdom from one generation to the next. And what we tell each generation matters in the words. And it kind of pushes a culture together, or it can use to separate. It can also be used as a tool for manipulation and control. I mean, let's face it, politically, socially, language is weaponized and can be weaponized, as we saw in Orwell with his newspeak. Cognitive development. I mean, even from a psychological perspective, language development is crucial to cognitive development. That the words that our children learn, how they learn, influence their cognitive structures. I mean, kids who read and expand their vocabulary early tend to be more successful in higher level jobs over the long run. Now, this cognitive development, when we get to the novel Brave New World, we're going to dive deep into that. So I'm going to kind of save that one for now. But cognitive development, emotional impact. Words have the power to evoke very strong emotions. And the rhetoric that we use and the propaganda that is used, it can inspire nations, or it can incite fear and anger and resentment. So in essence, words, they don't just merely reflect our perception of reality. They have the active power to mold our reality. Any of you that have ever had an amazing coach or a teacher in your lives, the words that they used with you can inspire you to higher levels. Or some of you maybe have had a situation where either a parent, a teacher, a coach spoke down to you and said you were never going to be anything. You're never going to amount to anything. You're not good enough to do that. Those words are very important. They frame our reality, and they are the cornerstone, the very foundation of how we understand the world. And so, we see it time and time again that the manipulation of words by politicians or the media to frame the real life, something real that's going on, it's an important thing. Here are some examples of how politicians have framed words. In one instance, they're kind of funny, but they're also terrifying at the same time. I'm just going to grab just a few of them, 3 of them, in fact, and how the words are actually the opposite of what they did. The Patriot Act. Do you remember that after 9/11, George W. Bush and the Patriot Act? It was initially intended to enhance national security. And we were told we need to do this because we need to be able to keep you safe from terrorism. Well, just as a fact, the Patriot Act has never, ever done anything to prevent any terrorist attack. But what it did do, it might be one of the greatest infringements on average American freedoms that we have ever seen in our entire life. Civil liberties were thrown to the side by allowing extensive government surveillance and data collection on American citizens, which just might be one of the most unpatriotic things that has ever been done to us in this country. Here's another fun one. Really recent history. The Inflation Reduction Act by President Biden, it's about a year, now it's been over a year or so, inflation was spiking hard. I mean, some of the highest inflation we'd seen in the United States in 40 plus years. So we get the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, assuming just by the title, this should be something to bring down inflation, but despite its name suggesting a decrease in inflation, critics argue that the act's significant spending measures and its focus on things like climate initiatives led to prolonged and painful inflation on everyday goods and services, crushing people on a fixed income and the lower income class, especially who are really hard hit by inflation, rather than reducing inflation overall. And then the third one, the Affordable Care Act by Barack Obama, also known as Obamacare. Critics have argued that the ACA led to increased health insurance premiums. I can say that since the Affordable Care Act came into play, my insurance has never gotten lower, and every year the cost continues to get higher. And I think you would be hard to find anyone with insurance who has seen their insurance become more affordable over the past 10 to 15 years. But those are just three examples. In our world, I think it's the key thing for us when it comes to words, just like in the novel, is we need to be hyper vigilant when we listen. Not just hearing the words that come out of their mouths or in print media. Make no mistake, though, the words they choose and when they use them, they're not by accident. Nor are they just coming off the cuff most of the time. So we need to have our ears perked up and our eyes wide open when we listen to the words to try and dig deeper than the superficial, because politicians and our government want us to stay incredibly superficial. So I led our conversation today talking about surveillance, and because I think it's just so vitally important. I talked a lot about it, but Big Brother is the face of the party in 1984, and Big Brother symbolizes the ever-present surveillance and authoritarian control over all the citizens, and the constant reminder that Big Brother is watching you. I mean, it's everywhere. It's on the street corners. It's on the teleprompters. It's everywhere, and it creates this pervasive atmosphere of fear and obedience. There are telescreens in every home and public place that broadcast propaganda and monitor every movement and sound, ensuring that no one can escape the party's watchful eyes, even in their own houses. They're watched and they're heard at all times. Privacy, freedom, very concept of home is completely obliterated because, yeah, Big Brother's in your home, and he's in your home all the time. And Winston experiences this surveillance firsthand, knowing that any deviation from the norm, any sign of dissent, it's going to be detected and it's going to be punished. The paranoia induced by this constant surveillance, I mean, it's a crucial tool the party uses to maintain control. We need to be aware of this. Paranoia and fear, these are very potent emotions, and they significantly impact our lives, almost always negatively. And here's why they're considered so dangerous to your personal life and such a potent weapon. Number one, paranoia, fear, they distort our reality. when we're afraid or we're paranoid, heck, we can see things, we can see threats that when there actually aren't any. And this leads us to irrational decisions or actions. And this altered state make interacting rationally just with the world very challenging. Physical health effects. I mean, wow, chronic fear, chronic paranoia lead to all kinds of inflammation, which can lead to heart disease, high blood pressure, weakened immune system, and that constant stress response triggered by these emotions harm the body over time. And we definitely see this with our character, Winston, who, although he's in his mid to late 30s, early 40s, he looks like he's probably 50-some. He's got big ulcer on his leg. I mean, the physical effects of this are terrible. The mental health issues, wow. I mean, having those things, they can definitely lead to anxiety disorders and depression, obsessive compulsive disorders. This cycle where paranoia breeds more intense mental health challenges, which in turn feed back into greater paranoia. Terrible health issues, social withdrawal, fear and paranoia. Think of times when you've been in a state of fear and paranoia. I mean, did that make you want to interact with all kinds of people, expand your social circles? Of course not. It leads you to protect yourself from these perceived threats. And it's isolating and it's lonely and it deteriorates your social skills, affects your mental health and your quality of life. Big Brother needs people completely focused on the state. So that social withdrawal is perfect for them. You know, paranoia and fear, they lead to just bad decision making. It's hard to think clearly, effectively, rationally when you're in a state of fear and paranoia. Erosion of trust. I mean, goodness gracious. If you're fearful or paranoid, do you trust your institutions? Do you trust other people in your personal life when you have fear or paranoia? I mean, no, of course not. And Orwell described what this surveillance life, what this does to the people and what it's like. So he says this, quote, "The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision, which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment, how often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire. It was total guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time, but at any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to," end quote. So this passage highlights really this invasive nature of surveillance. You don't know if they're watching you every second. You don't know for a fact. You don't know where Big Brother is. Is he watching you literally every second? Or if you take just a little break, could maybe you get away with something for a little bit, but then you get plugged right back in? You don't know. You just don't know. And so that creates a state of fear and paranoia and distrust all the time. But is it as bad or worse in our world today? Well, let's think about this just for a second. Surveillance world is pervasive and it's multifaceted in our world. Internet browsing. Every one of your online activities can be tracked through an IP, through your cookies, through your IP address, through your browsing history, through your internet service provider. Potentially government agencies can access this data when they want to. Your emails and your messaging apps. Government agencies can and do gain access to emails and messages with a warrant. Even encrypted messaging services can be subject to legal pressures to give them access. Smartphones and apps. Smartphones are all equipped with GPS, microphones, cameras that can be remotely accessed. Apps often require permissions that allow them to track location, access contacts, even listen in. Social media, your posts, your likes, your shares, your friend network, they're all visible on the platform. And they can be accessed by authorities through legal channels as well. Smart home devices. Devices like smart speakers, security cameras, smart TVs record audio and video, and data can be potentially accessed by the manufacturers or law enforcement. Financial transactions, your bank and your credit card transactions, every single thing you ever buy on any card, debit card, credit card, gift card, whatever, it can be tracked and reviewed by financial institutions with warrants or some without by government agencies. Travel, your air travel, there's database store of information about your travel plans, which can be accessed by government agencies. License plate readers on roads, highway cameras can track vehicle movements. Public surveillance cameras in public, they track your movements, activities. Heck, they'll even give you a blowing a red light if you want, or not paying a toll, or going too fast through a school zone, whatever the case might be. There's public surveillance cameras on almost all corners right now. Medical records, generally protected by privacy laws, so we think and so we hope. But your medical records can be accessed by insurance companies, potentially law enforcement with a court order. Workplace monitors, employers, heck, when you're at work, they can monitor all your communications, all your behaviors in the workplace, emails, computer usage, video surveillance. Your educational records, schools and educational institutions, they track all your activities and records, even your financial data through the financial, if you're on FAFSA and you need financial aid. And, we could just go on and on and on with this. But, and it's easy just to discard how much of our lives are controlled and monitored. But again, those days of, well, I got nothing to hide, so who cares? Or blindly accepting that the government needs surveillance access to keep us safe. Well, I hope you reconsider those stances. But sadly, I fear that maybe those days of our own freedom is already long gone. China has this thing, it's called the social credit system. And it's live right now, and it's in practice. And they monitor every aspect of their citizens, and good Chinese citizens are rewarded and bad ones are punished. And you might say, well, how do they do that? Well, maybe they get to go on vacations out of the country, or maybe their kids get into better schools, or maybe they get better jobs, or maybe they get promotions for being a quote unquote good Chinese citizen. And kind of like your financial credit score. If you get above 700 or so, you get certain privileges if you need to borrow money or stuff like that, maybe better insurance rates. And if you got bad financial credit, well, you got to suffer the consequences. In China, they do that in being a good or a bad Chinese citizen. And you might say in the West, well, that could never happen here. There's no way we would ever do that. Do you think sometimes people are punished for what they watch, what they say, what they post, where they go? See, the ability to do that, what they're doing in China, it's already here in the U.S. right now. And in many ways, our surveillance state flexes its muscles in ways that are probably even better than the way the Chinese do it. But we complacently keep giving our governments and our huge corporations more and more surveillance power for our quote unquote convenience, for our quote unquote safety, for our quote unquote success. One of the few things you can get Democrats and Republicans to very quietly, I might add, vote together on is the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, which has happened multiple times. Obama did it twice. Trump did it once. Biden did it once, which basically allows for mass surveillance to quote unquote protect us from terrorists. Although this surveillance used daily has never actually saved us from any terrorists. Why and what are they doing with all that information? See, the surveillance state is here. And whenever we have the chance to push back against it, we should. Whenever we cede these freedoms to the government, we will never, ever get them back. And Orwell gives us this warning, and we need to heed it. Another one of the most disturbing and powerful images that promote the totalitarian regime in the novel 1984, it's got to be the 2 minutes of hate. So what the 2 minutes of hate in the novel, it's a daily ritual that everybody, all party members, they have to go through every day. And so what it's all about is they have to watch a film, and this film depicts the party's enemies. Particularly, Emmanuel Goldstein is a name we haven't really talked about. He's this rebel outsider, this revolutionist trying to bring down the party, and the party's hatred towards this person and everything that he stands for. Sometimes I might rage against another military enemy. There's only 3 states left on the entire globe, and sometimes they're going after Eurasia or East Asia or whatever the place is, and but they love to go after Emmanuel Goldstein because he's against the party. And in this practice, what it's meant to do is to unite the population in a common emotion and reinforce their loyalty to Big Brother. This orchestrated frenzy of hate also serves to direct the citizens' frustrations and anger away from all the shortcomings of the party and how pathetic everybody's life is towards a scapegoat. Brilliant concept. And Orwell describes the situation like this, quote, "The horrible thing about the 2 minutes of hate was not that one was obligated to act as a part, but that it was impossible to avoid joining it. Within 30 seconds, any pretense was unnecessary. A hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer seemed to flow through the whole group of people like an electric current, turning one even against one's will into a grimacing, screaming lunatic," end quote. And so basically what they did is every 2 minutes, everybody'd be in front of their teleprompter, and voila, the 2 minutes of hate would start. They'd show horrible images. They'd show the enemy, and everybody had to rant and scream and swear and rage at the enemy, all in unison. That ideological hatred, very potent in political power for many reasons, and influencing both the control over the population and stability of the ruling entity. And I want to talk about why it's so effective. But before we get there, 2 minutes of hate, could it be argued that both liberal media, cable news with those talking bobbleheads there, it's a form of the 2 minutes of hate, right? You get one piece of you get one opinion that is completely amplified, and they mock, deride, yell, scream, make fun of anybody who's from the opposite side. Do you ever see that on cable TV? It's basically the 2 minute hate in action. So if you want to see what it looks like in our modern terms, just turn on CNBC or CNN, and maybe, sadly, even on the conservative side, look at Fox News or some of those other conservative cable outlets. Notice if you'd sense a whole lot of hate and mocking and ridiculing the other side. That's basically what the 2 minutes of hate were in the novel 1984. But why ideological hatred is so effective and why we see it over and over again. Because, most people will say, I'm so sick of the division. I don't want the division. I wish people would stop trying to paint us all into a box. Well, it works, though. And this is why politicians and the media do it. Unity against a common cause. See, if you can get a common enemy, and it doesn't need to be real, it could just be fabricated. This unification distracts from any internal problems. It's a blame game. You can blame somebody else for all the problems, and it unites the other side against the other one. And for a politician, creating fear. How many times do you hear a politician say, if you don't elect me, the United States of America is going to end. If you don't elect me, democracy itself is over. Fear. And it works. Number 2, another reason, justification for authoritarian measures. Politicians will justify increasing their power and restricting freedoms by presenting the steps that are necessary to protect them from the hated, evil, awful other person. They will use it as a means to seize power. The third one is just diversion from the real issues. If you can channel attention and emotion toward your enemy and blame them for the failures, blame them for the corruptions, call them racist, sexist, misogynists, whatever you want to call them, Nazis, in any term you want to throw at them. But if you can divert attention from your own failures towards somebody else, you win, or you have the potential to win. Cultivating loyalty. The tribal mentality has been talked about more and more in our postmodern world. And, a 2 minutes of hate, or constantly listening to one cable news network, or just listening to one side of the argument on social media over and over and over again, it reinforces this purity of thought, and the other side being ignorant and stupid and dumb. And how often do you hear that? And let's be honest, you and I both, have you done that? You call the other side dumb, stupid, ignorant because they don't agree with you? If you've done that, they've captured you at least a little bit. But that doesn't mean you can't break it, but that cultivation of loyalty is powerful. And, the moral high ground. I'm on the moral superior side. I'm the one that is going to save you, and I'm the legitimate one, and I'm the one that you need to trust. And so throwing out hateful messages at your opponent will do that all the time. And we know how they implement these things. They do it through propaganda, whether it be media or public messaging. They do it through education and indoctrination. Sadly, there's certain education systems and there's that vilify ideas and groups over the long run. Scapegoating, blame your enemy for something else. Legislation, laws can be enacted that criminalize certain ideologies or expressions, and they suppress opposition or suppress free speech. Symbolic confrontation, demonstrations, trials, campaigns against political enemies. Those are all of these things kind of foster that ideological hatred. And it's very effective, not because it resolves any actual issue, but because it manipulates emotions and perceptions to solidify and expand political power. None of this solves any core problems, except it keeps one group in power and keeps another one out of it. And it's so dangerous because it leverages basic human instincts like fear and anger, the need to belong, to just have a foundation. And this strategy has been used across many regimes over many historical periods. And it demonstrates this enduring relevance and danger that happens when we let anger and like a 2 minute of hate mentality seep into our lives. So I think it's time to wrap this thing up. Exploring the shadows of totalitarianism in Orwell's 1984. And hopefully you can now see these alarming parallels with our contemporary American life. They're everywhere. And whether it would be surveillance, proliferation, that manipulation of truth with the doublethink, with the erosion of privacy and personal freedom, the weaponization of fear, the polarization and ideological enforcement of things. These are real. And, as we delve into these themes, it becomes more and more clear that Orwell's 1984, it's not just a relic of the Cold War literature, but it's a modern reflection of our own times. that insidious creep of totalitarianism elements into our democratic societies in the United States, in Europe, all across the West. It should be a strong and powerful warning of this delicate balance that democracies have between security and freedom. And each step on this path, sadly for us, it seems to be mirroring the dark corridors of Winston's world. And we need to be diligent, because once you fall too far down, you can't get back up. And so hopefully you enjoyed this. In the next episode, we're going to look at this in a totally different version of totalitarianism in Huxley's Brave New World. And sure, there'll be some similarities, and we'll just glance over those, but there are some very stark differences. But Huxley's vision hits us square between the eyes just as hard, if not harder, than Orwell's does. So, until the next episode, follow the reading material in the show notes. I promise you it'll make these things, it'll make the novel come to life after you listen to this and then you read it, or you read it, then you listen to this. And I would love if you find examples where there's things that stand out from our discussion in the novel versus the podcast, and post your comments. Give some real world examples that you see where Orwell's novel came to life. I'd love to read that. So again, I thank you for listening, and I look forward to having you tune in for the next episode. Take care.